because we'll talk a little bit about how our CSA works, because I think that's kind of foundational to fall production and winter production in general, because you can't, one of my perspectives is, for at least late fall and winter, you really can't rely on just a farmer's market. Because the first time you get crummy weather, nobody comes out. And we've got a roof over our heads and heaters in our farmer's market, but still, people just don't show up if the weather's bad. So we have to have, that CSA is a really nice, solid, we always know how much we're going to sell every week. It's a very reliable form of sales. So we'll come back to that. But first, I'd really like to go around the circle, because it's a small enough group and we can introduce each other. We won't introduce each other, we'll introduce ourselves. That'll work out better. But I'd love to. Just get your name and kind of what your interest is or how you got here. Do some walking, because it is going to get dark on us. And so we want to see enough of the garden to get a good flavor for what's going on this time of year. I will say, I'll give you the quick numbers, because some of you haven't been here before. So we have 25 acres. We had 20 until last year. We bought this 5 next to us. So we just started growing over there this year. Last year. And we've been here for 15 years, bought the place in 2007. I grew up in Roundtree neighborhood, so just a couple blocks from MSU and from Greenwood, but Denny's going to Greenwood this year, so it's kind of fun. That's where I went to school. I have 10 kids, and my 2 oldest are out of the house now, 17 and 18, and doing amazing things. 3 oldest are actually, and so they're out and doing their things. But I still have a big family at home as well, and we do year-round vegetable production. We have on that 25 acres. We really only grow vegetables on about 2.5 acres, so it's a fairly small footprint. It has been our full-time income for about 14 and a half years. So we really kind of jumped in the deep end and have managed to pull it off. Not always with a great deal of grace, but it's always at the end of the year we've always been able to carry on. I guess that's a pretty decent recommendation.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah, it is. And and I'll say just a word more about that, because I really think. Well, I had a good friend who came by here today, and he's actually headed to Texas. He's got some back problems, and he's kind of semi-retiring from farming. But he came and visited us when he moved to Springfield 10 years ago. And he said, I've been told by so many people that you can't make a living doing this, that it's not possible. This isn't a way that you can do it. And he came and visited us and went, oh, well, they can do it. I mean, he said, if that guy can do it, I can do it. Good. I'm glad I'm that kind of encouragement for you. That's right. But it is, it's an amazing life. And I'm extremely grateful to get to do it. And part of what I love sharing is how it is possible. So to that end, I would point out that although our income level has never been, what you would call like maybe an upper middle class income, we have lived the lifestyle we've wanted to, which is close to the land and getting to experience this every day with my kids and my coworkers and so on. We get to travel a lot. So this year, in the last 12 months, I've been to Peru, Costa Rica, spent a week on the Buffalo River. Last September we went to Alaska. So when we get out and about, and I think that for us that was more important necessarily than income, having disposable. Well, I guess we do have enough disposable income to make these things happen. That's how we choose to spend it. So I want to say that it's not. There's also this sort of mentality. It's like, oh, poor me, I'm the farmer. There's a lot of that out there in the farming world. And I just want to say, no, you don't have to be that way. It's an amazing lifestyle. It's an amazing adventure, and it's not as remunerative as maybe like going and selling stock or whatever people do that makes tons of money. But I'm pretty happy there, so I wouldn't trade it too much. So, 15 years, and my wife Sarah is helping some friends of ours find some stuff, but she'll be joining the tour with us as well. So, and let's see. Like I said, we're going to come back here, so we'll kind of dig into a little bit about storage, and because that's a really important part of fall when we get back. But right now, we'll go check things out. So expect, like in July, when we're all walking around about half brain dead because it's 95 degrees, and we're just stumbling to get through the day. You can't expect us to be like, oh yeah, that's right, it's a month and a half before September. I got to get my fall brassicas started or whatever. So we have to have that on a written plan. Now, I've got friends whose plan is much simpler than ours, who do it just fine. So it's not like it has to be a fancy spreadsheet. I've got friends who do that with a piece of poster board, and they just write down for each bed, like I need to start the onions for this bed and this week, and they use kind of columns and so on. So there's lots of different ways to manage that. But what that leads to then is all these, and then now the next cue, and I'm really big on the idea of cues, right? So when something needs to happen, what is my cue that that's time for it to happen? Just like somebody standing off stage and being like, time to move on, right? And the cue for us is to go, oh, well, look, the snapdragons are ready to go out. They're big. You know, it's time to transplant the snapdragons. And also I can look at the snapdragons, 3 weeks before that and go, oh, they're this big. 2 weeks from now, I want to have a bed ready for them so that they're ready to go in. So that's the beauty of having a written plan, is that then once you have that written plan, you don't really, I don't generally refer to the written plan that much for the transplant. It's just for the direct seeding part, because once the transplants are growing, they kind of tell me their own story, right? Other things we've learned, in specific to fall production, is that you can see this is like partial shade here, and it actually makes a big difference. Afternoon heat for the brassicas, the cabbage, the cauliflower, and even the lettuces is just too much. You can see this one got a little too much anyway, because this week has been pretty brutal. Everybody was like, hey, it's September, and we were all happy, and then it was 95 degrees. Really? So the plants included. So that's kind of a challenge, but the shade helps. It's not a perfect solution. You can see all the leaves, and especially when the plants are very little, sometimes the leaves causes a problem. So I have to come through on a daily or every couple days and just try and pick out the leaves that might cause a problem. And it's on an automated watering system, because we do not trust ourselves to water things. It's so easy to kill things in the hot weather. I mean, we've seen ourselves do it many times. So the timer is great. This one goes off twice a day. It goes off around 10 a.m. for about 15 minutes, and then it goes off again at about 4:30 in the afternoon for 20 minutes or so. And so that's why everything out here right now is relatively well watered. But it was a little droopy about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Things were not in great shape. And the other thing we've done over the years is we have discovered that we are not. Some of the stuff is really hard to start this time of year. And our greenhouse is not really set up for that, for just plant growing. We use it for a lot of things, including production, meaning like growing food, end product food. So people who are growing really good seedlings this time of year are starting them in July, and they're starting them in cool greenhouses. And they have a big wet wall on one end, pulls the air. There's big fans at the other end that pull the air through, and it actually is cooler in there than it is outside. It makes a huge difference. And grows really great brassicas, which is what's behind Anna there. There's these brassicas so we buy some, because we have found that we just cannot reliably produce a really high quality brassica seedling. And it's one of those cases where specialization saves the day. These guys, they've been doing it for 25 or 30, I don't know how many years. The name's great, by the way. If you ever are looking for them, this will help you remember it. The greenhouse's name is F. Lauer. Fred Lauer was his name. Fred's long gone, but he established F. Lauer Greenhouse. And if that wasn't destiny, I don't know. He's pretty amazing or something. But they grow great brassicas, and we get a lot of our brassicas in the fall from them. We still have to start some things that they don't grow, or that we kind of back up what they might not have based on what we need. But mostly they grow. Fall is bringing a mist.
It feels nice.
It
feels really good.
It's so hot. So anyway, these, question?
Is that like
It's a wobbler type. Yeah, in fact, I can turn it on if you guys want, but we better stand back, because it will get us. Let's see here. Let's turn it on for a moment. Yeah, it's a wobbler, so it's a single jet that comes out of the top, and that thing wobbles like crazy. Greenhouse.
And then the wind.
Yeah, that was pretty much more than
That felt good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but having timers on waters, especially in the fall, is really a big benefit for fall production because we have. It's just there's so much going on right now. You know, between we're still harvesting daily, cucumbers, tomatoes, eggplant, bell peppers, all that stuff is still just coming out of the field like crazy. And at the same time, we're trying to establish all these fall crops. So anything we can automate is a win. Now, the other thing I've learned, you know, automation's only as good as the guy who's checking on it, right? It's that whole trust but verify thing. So it is important if you got a timer to go by it once a day and say, this seems to be working, or oops, something happened. You know, that didn't work. And that's not too surprising, right? Because it's electronics, and we all know sometimes they work like you think they are, and sometimes they don't. But the simple version is just a little battery-powered, you know, like the Orbit water timers. They're pretty simple and pretty cheap. It's about $30 or $40. Saved me thousands of dollars worth of produce for those little battery-powered timers. The more complex version, which we now have, is like a sprinkler system. So it's got it's just a backyard sprinkler system, but it's set up with valves all over my greenhouse, all over my fields. And so now I can turn on water pretty much anywhere with the phone, which is slick. But also I can go to the control panel and I can set do an hour on this and then another hour on that, and I can set up a schedule that I just push. It goes each day, or it can be manually started as well.
What's the name of that?
The one that I'm using is a Toro.
Toro.
Toro, and there's a Toro agricultural controller, but it actually doesn't. It's overkill, and it doesn't work as well with the phone as the Toro yard controller.
How many zones does that have?
It can go up to 16. I think.
16 zones.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, it is. It works pretty. It can't run more than one zone at a time.
Yeah.
But my water pressure isn't really such that I can. I mean, I've got 7 different controllers around the farm, so I don't really even need to run 2 on one controller. The Toro was recommended to me. There's a lot of companies doing that, so I don't know that it's the thing. But I have a good friend who does a lot of that work, and he said Toro is a good one and economical. The valves are all the same. You know, no matter which valve you get, they all operate the same. There are variations in sort of the trim and that sort of stuff. But all right, shall we? Our fall stuff is transplanted, maybe even a little less. We do a lot of direct seeded turnips, beets, carrots, radishes. We do a lot of different kinds of radishes. So we've got Daikon radish, big black Spanish radishes, things like that. So this is pretty typical fall production for us. We've got scallions. Scallions are one of those things we found we can do year round. So this will probably be the last. This would be the last batch of scallions that's out in the field. After this, they'll go into high tunnels or low tunnels, but they'll be undercover. But scallions are pretty freeze tolerant, so they can be in an unheated tunnel and get really cold, and then harvest them a day later, and they're fine. And now, if they get that repeatedly, like they get 10 degrees repeatedly, they do start to have some damage, but it's a great crop because it's you can get a lot of value in a small space, and they have a pretty good market appeal. Most people eat green onions, so you're looking at. I did kind of allude to this earlier, but I like to talk about. I have a good friend who says he's French. He says some people find it crass when we talk about the money. But I find it's an easy way to measure things, And yeah, fair enough, right? So you're looking at this. This is about 200 bundles of green onions. So at $2.50, that's $500 worth of green onions there. Sitting next to about $500 worth of bok choy. So there's $1,000 worth of vegetables in that bed. If they make it right, and if we, there's bound to be some catastrophe there and whatever. But the point is, there's a lot of value crammed into a very small space there, which is part of why fall production works, is because we can do a great deal of production in a small space. So whether that's on a production scale or whether that's in your backyard garden, either way, you can get a tremendous amount of value and food out of a relatively small space. These are leeks. So the leeks will not finish until like Thanksgiving-ish. And by then, hopefully, they will be about that big around or so. And
Do you keep filling around them? Do you?
so I just plant these really deep.
Okay.
But yes, the traditional leek method is to hill. And we did that for years. And now we set them in a hole not that deep.
And
so
then fill the
it'll all
hole
be-
periodically.
Well, they kind of fill it themselves.
Okay.
So we take it's a piece of pipe, and we've got a cross piece that we step on. In fact, there was one of those out here for a lot longer than there should have been, but I think we finally put it away. But you set it in there, and you step on it, and it makes just a single hole, you know, that deep. And then we take the transplants, because we grow transplants over there on the slab, and we drop them in the hole, and we don't backfill them or anything. So they're still in a big hole, but they're down deep, so they're nice and moist down there. And then they do this, and then, you know, eventually the soil kind of collapses in on them, but it gives them a nice, really big space to grow in. It works really well. So we seeded those around the 1st of June, and then we transplanted them the 1st of August. And I should have done that a month earlier. But it's hard to say. They don't like heat. They don't. They just in the heat. They just kind of sit there and stare at you, which is a bummer because leeks are a great fall crop. They take a long time. There are different varieties. So the fall ones are a little faster growing than the summer one. Or yes, no, other way around. Sorry, the spring ones, spring summer, are a little faster growing than the fall and overwintering. But the great news about these is they are almost impervious to frost. I mean, I've dug leeks out of a foot of snow and not had any trouble with them. They're really, really hardy. So they're a great crop for winter cropping. Bok choy, this will be, after this, bok choy, all the bok choy from now forward will be in tunnels because it's tolerant of a little bit of frost, but you know, anything we plant now, we have to plan. So this is part of the thinking process is, if we're planting something now, it's not going to finish before the 1st of November, right? So by the 1st of November, there's a pretty good chance we're going to have 20 degrees. It's hard to imagine right now, but you know, it will happen, and or more than likely will. So we have to kind of plan for that. And so we're going to say, well, we're not going to put things out that'll be hammered by a 20-degree frost, and those are going to go in tunnels for better protection. We have had that happen. We've had it happen even October when it's got really cold. At that point, we have lots of row cover we can pull out and spread out to kind of protect them. We'd rather do that inside the tunnels where it's much easier and more reliable, frankly, too. So long, yeah.
Having to keep the white moss, the cabbage moss, growing across.
You know, the bok choy, we sprayed with BT once on that. Are you familiar with BT? It's a really great. In fact, it's so good that my conventional grower friends use it. So it's like it's the only pesticide we share. It's like everything else they have a much more effective version, but BT is as good as it gets. So yeah, but it does work really well, and there's some holes there, but you know they're not terrible. Now I also, well, you know, I'm not completely sure about it, but I think those were under insect net when they started. Yes, they might have.
Even in the field, or just
Even in the field, yep. We'll see some crops that are still covered with insect netting. And we've grown to use a lot more of that over the last couple of years. I really like it. I mean, we have a love-hate relationship with it. It's a big pain, but it does a really good job of keeping our crops intact.
physical
So,
barriers.
yeah, right? I mean, that's the number, well, you know, so in terms of pest control, we can either grow something that doesn't have a pest, or we can do seasonal avoidance, or we can do physical barrier. And then after that, we're starting to get into using materials, which I'm just never as excited about. So physical barrier is nice.
So how do you anchor that stuff down? With
Yeah, we'll see
sandbag?
some, but I've got hoops, just little wire hoops, and I don't think we have any hoops left out in this field, but we put wire hoops over, and then we anchor it down with sandbags. Which is pretty good, as long as there's a lot of technique to it. You know, it's one of those things that I have to spend a bit of time teaching and then checking and teaching and checking because it's really easy to do that and end up with the netting kind of rising between the sandbags. But there's a technique where you just make sure that it's nice and snug between, and that holds it down on the ground.
When did you plant the beets? Because they're nice.
Yeah, they're pretty nice. These beets were transplanted. would say that we transplanted those in the end of July. They've been out there a while. They didn't grow much when it was hot. They sat there for a long time. But the last 3 weeks, well, before this week, they were growing really fast. And they'll come back and be really nice now. But yeah, we don't have much luck with beets in the heat, but in the fall they're a gorgeous crop for us usually. This year we had some problems getting them established because of the heat, and so the only beets that are doing any good for us are transplanted beets, which is why we do them, because we found that we can control the conditions better for germination of beets in our greenhouse, or even we'll put them in the cooler, things like that to keep them the temperatures that we want, and then we can transplant them out. It's questionable how economical it is to transplant beets, but I don't know. It probably is, because they go out fairly fast, and they sell well up to a point. Yeah. So, and I like eating beets.
So you start your seeds probably around July?
Sorry, middle of July probably. Yes.
Beet greens are real popular in the market too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Swiss chard as well.
Swiss chard.
I don't understand why. Maybe it's for every local Swiss chard in the world, but I grow a lot of it. Not my favorite. Yeah. Okay. So, and then you can see some lettuce established over there. So that's where summer crops have been taken out, just on the inside edge of that tunnel. And you can see that the middle of that is fall hardy flowers. Well, the petunias aren't really fall hardy, but they just kept going all summer, so we haven't taken them out. But we've got some stock and some ornamental kale, which technically isn't a flower, right? But it is a good fall crop. And then the bell peppers on the far side are ready to come out. Normally they wouldn't be. Normally we'd be having really productive peppers right now, but we've got a disease in our peppers this year. So if you walk in a pepper tunnel, be sure and sterilize your hands after you leave here. We don't know what it is. We've got to send a sample in to find out, but it's making all our peppers collapse.
It's like a wilt.
Yeah,
we got that too.
Did you get it this year too?
Yeah, we got it.
Have you had it before?
Yeah, we did.
Not to that extent though.
Right. Yeah, we've had just a few plants here and there before.
Right.
But this year
Yeah.
Well, that's encouraging. I hope that it just means that we're having one of those weird years.
Some cycle, yeah.
Because it's devastating. I mean, this time of year, we're usually pulling out hundreds of pounds of bell peppers a day.
Right.
Because they're so productive this time of year, and we're down to like just a trickle of peppers. So, yeah, disappointing. All right. Other things you can see, we talked quite a bit about irrigation. So this is version 1 of irrigation, and over there on the other field, which we'll walk around here in a second and see. But it's that's what we're going toward. We like those better. Which is a header with plug-ins, and I'm glad to share those details with you. But I prefer that. I think it's a little more reliable in terms of coverage than these 3 tripod sprinklers. But I will say the tripod sprinklers, the great thing about them is it's all off-the-shelf stuff. We built the tripods on farm with a welder. It fit the bill really well. Those are a little different, but they're cheaper to build, and the volume that's in the header gives you better pressure at each sprinkler head, and so we get a better coverage overall.
So you got one header down at the end? Or?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's a 3/4 inch. Well, we're going to go out and see it. We'll go see one. Okay. That one's through top the 1st of September, and that just pushes them to mature all the fruit. I mean, that's the theory. There's honestly very, very little information about growing figs under protected culture or growing them in cold climates. Most figs are grown, south, like middle of Arkansas and further south, and of course the coasts. And even Oregon. Like, you can grow a lot of great figs in Oregon because they'll never get that cold. But they may not really ripen well either. Peach ripen. So it's kind of an interesting challenge. I don't recommend anybody grow figs to make money. It's not a money maker. It's kind of a passion project. We enjoy it. They sell well. It's just the volume per square foot over time. So we will cut that all back because they die back to the ground every year. So we cut them back, and then we can grow a crop around them in the wintertime. We can do some lettuce and spinach and things like that are relatively shallow rooted. Because the fig roots are just like a cobweb of mesh of roots under there. So we can't really dig stuff very deeply, but we can do some real shallow planting.
How long have you have these been established?
2 years. Yeah, they grow really fast. They were little trees. 2 years ago. Yeah, and they come up from the ground every year. So
Do you amend the soil with calcium or something like that to these big, or
I'm in with tons and tons of compost.
just compost? That's it.
Well, yeah, I don't remember adding much else to the big house.
And your outdoor figs come back
Mhm.
every year too.
They do. Now sometimes they always give me reason to doubt because it's like the 1st of June before they show up. So every year I go, well, that was it.
Do
I
you
killed them.
compost them in the winter or put straw or something over them? You just leave.
They're buried in mulch. I mean, they're pretty deeply mulched in straw and wood chips. But I don't add to it every year. I probably should. It would probably benefit them, but I don't.
Depends on what kind of winter we really have.
Well, that's true
This
too.
year might
And
be
they've
that
gone
year.
through. You know, these guys have been in the. These out here have been in the ground for 6 years or so. So they've been through some really cold winters. I mean, we had one winter there where it was below zero for almost a week, and it was negative 13 was the low we hit. And that was the year that I really do this every year. I'm like, well,
We got to move.
figs died this year. Oh well, we're not going to have any figs this. And then they, the 1st of June, they start to send up these little shoots, and before you know it, they're high. Yeah. Tricky little things. Just want me to believe resurrection. So we do think about levels of protection. So the stuff that's out in the field right now, that we'll see, radishes and turnips, things like that. We have row cover to pull over those. So that's kind of the basic level of protection. It's out in the field with a layer of row cover. That works really well for things like spinach, somewhat with kale. In fact, we've had winters when the kale has gone through the whole winter just under one sheet of row cover. More often it needs a little more than that to get through. That's when something like this comes in. So this is what we call a caterpillar tunnel or kitten tunnel. And this is a single sheet of plastic. The pipe is chain link top rail. So this is like a do-it-yourself, build on the farm. Or there's a company called Farmer's Friend that sells them very economically, and I'm not actually sure you can't make them much cheaper than Farmer's Friend makes them, but his are 3-piece bows, and I like a single-piece bow, so maybe it's more structural stability. But these are really great for winter production of head lettuce, choy. We can do, of course, spinach and kale all through the winter in these with either that or interior covers. So we'll put cover, so if it gets cold, like below 20 degrees, then we'll be pulling covers inside the tunnels. And we do have an end wall, the door right there, but there's an end wall that belongs here. And so we'll put those on here at the end of, probably the middle of October or so. We'll put end walls on, lower the sides down.
Is that secured in the ground?
Yeah, so it'll hang from the top, and then it stakes down into the ground.
The poles are in the ground though?
Oh, this stake, I was talking about the end wall, but yes, they are. So this is on about a 3-foot steel stake. It's a sucker rod, 3/4-inch sucker rod, which is from the oil industry. So they're pretty long, and then they've got a hook about a foot down, and the hook sits at ground level. So we drive about 2 foot into the ground, then 1 foot's up, and we put the bows over that, and then that hook is what holds the plastic on. So you can see those the strap that goes back and forth. It's like lacing your shoes. You go back and forth across from hook to hook, and that's actually what holds. Well, there is a wiggle wire here at the end, but otherwise the plastic is held on by that, which is great in its simplicity. It also is kind of a pain when you want to raise and lower the sides. So it's a compared to these which roll down, which are super in terms of if you've got to vent it daily or something like that, it's really, really nice. But they are a more hassle to build and more maintenance to.
And this holds up to wind?
Well, they do now. I mean,
Depends how you build it.
we've had more than a few take off. We'll say it that way. I think until about 7 years ago, so we've been here 15. So the first 8 years, it was a pretty regular thing for us to have a tunnel take off sometime in the winter. Usually when it gets really sloppy wet, so everything's loose in the ground. And the thing that changed that for us was we started to use these screw-in anchors. Is there one of those screw-in anchors there on the corner? Can you see it? Maybe it's over We should have one, right?
See, he got somebody to pull weeds, I told you.
Here's a screw in anchor right here. It's a little hard to tell what it is. See that iron? That iron, it looks like an eyeball. It's got a screw on the end, an auger screw, and that's about, I think that's a 24-inch anchor, so it's down there pretty deep. And what happens is, once you screw that in, then it's not just pulling a 4-inch piece of soil. It's pulling it's pulling a cone. So these things are rated at like, I don't know, something absurd, like 3,000 pounds. I think this one's 24-inch. Yeah, so it's about, maybe a little
Use
longer.
the helper bar to get it in.
Yeah. Yes. I tried I say that because I got the big drill out and I made a thing and it didn't work very well. It was kind of scary actually. Because if it grabs anything, then the steak's not turning you on.
How wide's the circle?
It's about that big, about 3.5 inch. They're called ground anchors or screw-in ground anchors, and I get them from the best price I've found is from a place out in California that sells in the vineyards. Lots and lots of vineyard supplies, and this is called, I think it's Orchard Valley Supply. But if you don't come up with it easily, then just text me. I'll look at my link. But
Some of the box stores like Home Depot, Lowe's,
sometimes have them. Yeah, they're more common than they used to be too. When I started using them, I never saw them anywhere, and now they've kind of caught on. But they've got a tremendous amount of down pressure, and that's the challenge. So when you think about tunnels and wind, they do two things. They either get squished, which is less common. That's like microburst type of damage, and that's just structural integrity. And we've moved our bows. Our bows used to be like 6 feet apart. Now they're 4 feet apart, and that changed that. And then the other thing is them taking off, of course. And taking off the anchor was the key to that. So we have screw-in anchors. There's 4 on each side, and that seems to be plenty. We're pretty windy up here. We get a pretty good howl when it happens. I mean, we do have a lot of tree lines, but if it comes from that direction, it's got a pretty good wind up before it intersects something. So it's not uncommon for us to have 40, even maybe, certainly occasional 50-mile-an-hour gusts. And anymore, we haven't had anything take off in about 7 years or so. But initially we did. I built one right here that ended up in the driveway, not the power lines. I had another one that was these kitten tunnels, that we call the kittens, these little portable tunnels. I say they're portable because we pull them up every couple of years and move them. It's for soil rotation, and it just kind of helps deal with perennial weeds and stuff like that. But they, we've had several of those come down. Or I had one time that we just put up. So the other thing that happens is those stakes kind of rust in place and they get more stable over time. The big old stakes are never going to rust through, but they rust into the soil just enough that they're really stuck.
You probably can't pull them out with the tractor.
Yeah, it takes a tractor. That's what we do. We run down through with the tractor and the chain, and you wrap it a couple times, and it just pops. Those aren't too bad to get out once you get them out. I mean, once you have a tractor, they're not fun to pull out by hand. But we had one time to lift it off because the stakes hadn't established themselves yet, so they were kind of slick, and it's just whole thing peeled over. It was a weird looking thing. But we've gotten better at building them.
And the snow with this expanse of like
snow
4 foot,
doesn't
it's okay.
seem to be a big problem. But that one's a little less tested, frankly. I mean, when's the last time we had a big snow, right?
The blizzard of whatever year that's 8 years ago.
Right. Yeah. And I didn't have anything come down in that. I have it in my head that like if we get more than probably 8 inches of snow, I probably need to be out there clearing off tunnels. This one, not so much. This one's a big old heavy-duty structural steel. Like it's not going anywhere. But everything else, and probably wouldn't worry too much about this one either because it's so pointy that it's going to slide pretty well. But these tunnels like this, I would probably come out here at beyond 8 inches and start working on getting some
And what
snow
would your
off.
method be? Would you use a broom?
The thing that
or
I've seen, I've done it from the
blower, or-
inside with a push broom, and that works okay. But it's you get about one side of one tunnel done, and you are whooped because this is not an easy motion. It doesn't start out hard, but about the 100th time you do this, you start to kind of huff and puff, and your shoulders wear out and so on. The best technique that I've found is 2 people with a rope between them, and you kind of floss the tunnel, and it just breaks the surface, and they shed it pretty well.
And this is the structure you move for 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm. So I'll take the when the plastic wears out. That's kind of my cue for that. The
About 8 mil.
6 mil. And you can see this plastic's looking a little rough. So when it starts to have a few holes in it, I've got 1 hole in it right now, I think. But if I get 4 or 5 holes, and I know it's 3 or 4 years old. 4 years is kind of my lifespan on plastic in general. Although this is reused plastic too. This came from another tunnel, so this is actually probably its 6th or 7th year. But when we get to that point, strip the plastic off, take the lacing off, strip the plastic off, lift the bows, take them somewhere else, set the stakes back in, set the bows back on it, put the purlin back on, new plastic, new. I usually can use the same lacing if it's the rope. And it takes us about a day with 3 people. It's not too bad. We know what we're doing nowadays, so it goes pretty fast. Yeah, it's worth doing, I think, because they do.
Looks simple. It's nice.
Right. Yeah.
They got I'm sure you're familiar with Johnny Seeds. They have a great library, resource library, JohnnySeeds.com.
Exactly.
I've looked on that. But they're so expensive.
Yeah.
Kits. I'm not talking about kids. This sounds like my speed right here.
Yeah. So I've been
text you to
these.
get
Johnny's has the big arc bender, and that's what their manual is built around. Is that idea? But these are actually bent with a tubing bender from Harbor Freight, and we have a big drill that we can attach to it, so it's done mechanically, or power tool. Which I'm glad to loan to anybody. So if you want to build a tunnel, get your pipe, and in fact I would even be up probably for splitting a load of pipe. You get much better prices if you buy them in bundles of 90. That's a lot of pipes. You just take 18 per, so it's a lot of. Or maybe this is more than that. These are 4 foot, so they do. It's like about 25, 26. Yeah. Is this 18? I think this is a 4 foot span. This one may be short. It's supposed to be 96 feet, which would be, I guess, about 25, 26, I suppose. All right, before we run out of daylight, let's go see some other stuff. All this has been composted. So actually, the backstory is we started by tarping. So we had spread black tarp on everything to kill the initial sod. And then we spread compost. And most of this we never tilled until recently. So like this over here has never been tilled. The sweet potato field's never been tilled. This we tilled to get it. It was potatoes, and so it was all torn up and hilly and weird, and so we tilled to get it kind of back into a smooth surface. And then we tarped it again for about 3 weeks, and that's why we have, I don't want to say 0, but really you can see where the tarp was and where it wasn't, right? And the Johnson grass is where it wasn't. But it worked really, really well. So these are turnips. I have a friend who says turnips, he feels guilty growing turnips. It's like printing money, or growing money, because they're so silly easy. And they sell pretty well. They only sell for about 3 weeks. But it's longer than that. It's like about 3 weeks before Thanksgiving and then through Christmas. And then the market goes away. I don't know what people do with them during that time period, but they seem to really like them then, and then they're done. But we grow. So these are purple top turnips, kind of your standard.
Whoa, there's a steak there. I don't know. Yeah, that was kind of sweet.
So these are purple top turnips. Now they're not there yet. You can see they've got their little purple tops on them, but they'll size up pretty fast. We should see in the next couple weeks they'll be this big. I like to harvest them about this big. That's my ideal. So we should have that by the end of middle to end of October. I would say we should be getting into baseball-sized turnips to harvest. These are a variety called KN Bravo. Which are a purple Daikon, and they get a little bit fatter, so they'll end up being about this big around, be about that long. Oh, I didn't bring my knife. Here you go. You got a knife?
So you don't do any scanning or anything? You just
Well, not if I can help it. Isn't that cool? Yeah, and they just get a bigger purple star inside of them. These are an easy seller. And once they freeze, they're really, really sweet. Right now, they're pretty fiery hot. But they get better and better, and they get big. So each of these will be, half pound or something. I mean, it's pretty big. So this, again, we're looking at, optimistically, we're looking at $1,000 worth of radishes and turnips on each of these beds. That's a little bit optimistic, but it's not outrageous.
Would you have to put row cover for the turnips?
No.
When it freezes? No?
Oh, yes, sorry. When it freezes, yes, I will. Yeah, don't mention that to my neighbors.
They don't know yet.
We haven't gotten to that part of the conversation yet. Yeah.
I'll edit that part out of the video.
Yeah, right.
You didn't do that for the seedling stage.
No, that's what I was thinking. You were asking me. That's right. So for seedling, it's just heavy irrigation. I mean by heavy, I mean like every day for 45 minutes or so to get everything to pop up. Now we also have a bed of radishes over there and a bed of arugula, which are our quick and easy crops, right? Like that's another one that feels like printing money is growing radishes. If you have a market for them, radishes are incredibly productive. Yeah, they're so fast and they're beautiful and they're easy to, up to a point, they're easy to sell. I think we sold about 50 or so bundles of radishes at the market last week, which is pretty good. I mean, that's a lot of radishes at $2.50 a bundle. That's worth doing. And it took us probably, it certainly didn't take us an hour to harvest those. They grow pretty fast. They harvest pretty fast, and that's really, prep the soil, seed them, come back and harvest. There's no weeding or anything. If you have to weed radishes, you lost the battle, right? But they grow so fast they don't typically have a lot of weeds. But the reason I like this field is it's a testament to the concept of minimal tillage and also to tarping. Tarping is really a powerful weed prevention tool.
Could you restate how you claimed sod?
Yes. So the sod got covered with a tarp just like that. It's important that it's wet when you do it, or at least nice and moist. Dry ground, like if we cover over something right now, it really doesn't die, it just goes dormant. But if you cover it while it's wet and still trying to grow, then it dies pretty fast. And of course, we've all done this, right? Like leaving something out in the backyard. It doesn't take long to kill the yard.
How long does that?
How long does it stay on? So it depends a little on the temperatures, a lot on the temperatures. When it's really warm and trying to grow in the spring, 2 or 3 weeks will be enough to kill most of your grass. Now, Johnson grass and Bermuda are different beasts, right? Yeah. Bermuda is more like a 6-month project. But it will work.
Do you round up anything on the Bermuda?
I don't. So I made the choice years ago to only use organic materials. So, yeah, if I mean, this is a big what if, but if I were ever to move the farm and I had Bermuda, I would probably start with some sort of herbicide just to knock it all down. Bermuda is horrible. It's a nightmare.
I was wondering about taking the tractor and skimming.
Yeah, you can do things like that. I've actually tilled Bermuda into oblivion. It's possible. You just have to till like 6 times in a season. You better have a lot of compost to replace all that organic matter. But it's doable. That's actually how I control it. Most of the time is I'll just dump 8 inches of compost on an area and just till it. Every time I get a green haze, go through and till it. And eventually you stop getting a green haze. But boy.
Up with a million more.
Well, but you chop them up enough times, you just exhaust them. The green, until they turn green, they're not making food. So they're trying to grow, and this has to happen during the growing season, which is the other problem. So anyway, yeah, so this works though. Now down there, we didn't do a good job. We should have tarped that, and so now we've got a weed issue that we're going to have to go through and clean up. And I did also do so tarp was the first step. Then dropped compost on it. I've got a compost spreader that I use, so I put it on pretty thick. And then these beds I grew sunflowers in last year, which is also a really great cover crop because they crowd things out. They get big, tall, and fast, and so they crowd out a lot of your low creeping vines and things like that. I did still have a little bit of bindweed in here this year, but it was very minimal. And so we did sunflowers last summer. Over the winter we had rye cover crop. So we spread grain rye, not annual rye, 'cause that's really a grass, but the grain type. And then we knocked that down when it's pretty young and spread set potatoes on there and spread compost on top of that. We have a lot of compost, so we kind of have this like layering approach when we're building our soil. And we grew potatoes in it. This is a mediocre potato crop, but it's turned into a really nice radish crop.
Is rye your favorite cover crop?
In the winter, yeah, I really like rye. It grows so strong, and crowds out everything else. The downside is it's hard to kill. So I do use some wheat and oats in the fall if I want to put it somewhere where I want it to die over the winter, and that usually works. Oats almost always winter kill.
And tomorrow night, MU Extension is, I think it's free. They're having a workshop on cover cropping in Missouri specifically. So if you want more info. Yep, it's a virtual workshop. Like if you look at MU Extension's website or Facebook page, it's up there.
Get straight rows. I really like straight rows. I'm a little OCD about it. It's like the only thing in my life that I'm OCD about, but I like straight rows, and so I love using the stake and string. No, I just like straight rows. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I really don't use. So for cultivation or anything, I don't use tractors. It's all hand cultivation. So I don't use. If I ever go to mechanical cultivation, I might have an advantage there. So we can have a quick word about varieties. You know, there's some pretty good charts out there, but you've got basically 3 levels of hardiness. You've got the frost sensitive, which would be tomatoes, eggplant, cucumbers, all the ones that just die in the frost, right? First time it gets cold. In fact, there's actually one tier above that. It's like basil and sweet potatoes that kind of start looking pretty sad around 50 degrees. In fact, basil can turn black before you die, which is weird. But most of them, you know, frost is what gets you. So that's the frost tender. Now, the terminology for the others is a little less consistent, but I usually say somewhat frost hardy. So there you've got things like cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, and we can walk and see some of these, but we're going to have a late night. But those can take down usually to about 25 without any serious damage. It depends a lot on the weather that leads up to it. So if you have, it's like just like us, you know, tomorrow is going to feel like 35 degrees because it's going to be 60 after it's been 95. The plants are very much the same way. They're adapted to heat or cool or whatever. So if we have a gradual cool down, and nights in the 40s, and nights in the 30s, and then frost, then those plants are really ready for it. The challenge is when we have nights in the 50s, and then we get a night in the 20s, we'll have a lot of damage from those frost, what we call the partially frost-hardy crops. But they are very tolerant of, you know, if they're adjusted, they can be very tolerant to cabbages and broccoli in particular. So, but then we have the next layer would be things like turnips and radishes, which can take down to about 20 degrees and have just minimal damage. Now they may get tops damaged, but the bottoms will still be good and usable. And there's a whole class of crops there. And then there's our real cold lovers, some things like carrots, which we usually don't harvest our last carrots until January. Now they won't necessarily grow a lot in the cold weather, but they'll survive and they'll be beautiful. And you dig carrots in January, it's kind of a magical moment, right? Oh, it's so sweet, so sugary. And that's true of all the winter vegetables, right? Their sugar levels go way up. So spinach is in that family, kale is in that, I mean, by family, that's not the right term to use, in that category of very frost tolerant. Spinach, kale, mustard greens, we don't really grow much of those because we've never found a market for those, but they
I'll eat them.
Do you like mustard greens? Yeah. I mean, there's always a few out there, but we'd take in the market and, you know, you'd sell maybe 2 or 3 bundles over a whole market. Like, well, that's not really, because I could grow the heck out of them. I mean, they grow like weeds. Mustard greens and collards. Now, collards are having their moment. Collards are having their moment. I don't know if Paula Dean or whoever, somebody kicked people into high gear around collards, but that's great because collards are easy to grow too. Cornstarch based, and this is real heavy tillage, which is why we haven't done it for years. We've really gotten away from tillage, but this is the time of year that makes guys cheat on their commitments to tillage and such. So we just kind of got excited. A friend of ours had this fancy schmancy tiller, bed shaper, plastic layer, and you know, I think it's working pretty well. So that's nice. We used to do quite a bit of it. It's just been a few years. But this is, you know, this has got those big brassicas in it. So we've got broccoli here. We've got heads of cabbage. This is actually, so this is a great example. We were talking about how we don't really do a very good job of growing our own brassicas. Seedlings. These are our brassica seedlings on this end. That's Mr. Lauer's brassica seedlings on the other end. So they don't always catch up. Sometimes it just doesn't work, you know. So other times they do catch up. So we'll see. And then there's a little bit of a weird sprouting broccoli out here too. Or sprouting cauliflower, which we haven't tried in a while. We were too late this year on cauliflower. Cauliflower is earlier, so when we talk about timing, cauliflower really needs to get in the ground like no later than the 1st of August. It takes a longer time, and it's more frost sensitive too. The heads actually get damaged by the cold. So, and broccoli will come on about 2 weeks before the cauliflower. So, I mean, production-wise. But this is a good system. I mean, I'm not running down black plastic. We've used it for years, and the great thing is, I mean, you can see there's zero weed pressure. There's the moisture is held right at the surface. On days like today, when it's just an oven out here and hot air moving through and pulling all the moisture out of the soil, it can't pull the moisture out of the black plastic soil. You know, it gets warm, but there's good moisture there because it's protected. And in the springtime, you get the opposite, where extra rain runs off, and you have these raised beds. So it's a pretty good system. It's not a panacea because you still have all this plastic, you have all this tillage, and there's problems with that. But it is a great way to grow a lot of vegetables and have less labor involved because there's just almost no weeding.
Is this just one big sheet that kind of falls in valleys and then you fill it?
It's a great question. So this machine lays a 5-foot wide sheet of plastic, and it rolls off on the back, and the bed gets shaped, and there's some I don't know what you call those, but some wheels that there's some wheels that hold the plastic down, and then discs that dump a little bit of soil back on it. So each of these ends only 3 inches below where you sit.
Oh, okay.
And then do you poke the holes?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's super soft. This stuff is like it would never get a job as a trash bag. It's way too light for that. It's super easy. So you just go through and poke holes with your fingers. Now this is the biodegradable stuff. The non-biodegradable stuff, it's harder to poke a hole. It's still possible to do it with your hand, but usually we would use a trowel for that. And we haven't used that stuff in a long time, but this stuff is pretty effective. The biodegradable stuff will be gone. I mean, it'll start breaking up in the next month or so, which is about the right amount of time to get our crop, well established and doing good things.
So you just pull it out and compost it?
Mm-hmm. Or just compost it in place even. I mean, it breaks down pretty quick.
What you doing?
Tractor or?
No, this is a big 4-wheel.
Big old-
Yeah. I mean, 27 horsepower. It's not
Smell
very
my
big.
boots.
This is one of the things I really liked about this machine was it operated well behind my tractor. It was everything my tractor could do to raise the beds and shape the bed and everything and fill it at the same time, but it did it. Yep. Last ditch sweet corn. It's gonna make. I think we're probably on some time. So we've got squash, which is frost tender, and hyacinth beans. So both of these will be gone the first time we get a frost. These will both melt down and be gone. And then we've got Daikon, and these are pretty cool. Has anybody raised the big white?
Yeah.
Daikon?
Oh my gosh.
You're gonna have some deep holes in there.
Pull it out without breaking it. Broke off. That's a Daikon. Now these, if you were Korean, this is like a major part of your diet. But as Americans, we're not very familiar with them. They're really tasty. Not right now, they're not. They're spicy hot. But as soon as it gets cold, they get really sweet. And they go great in a stir fry or kimchi. They're a key component of a lot of their pickled stuff. So I really like them. And they grow like weeds. I mean, they really are. They're like a radish. Well, they are a radish, but they're just abundant and easy. And I mean, look at the top.
The greens are good too. The greens are good too.
Yeah, exactly. And then they store really well. So you stick these in a cooler, and we'll talk a little bit more about storage when we go up to the front, but you can stick these in a cooler in a box in 35 degrees and have them, for the rest of the winter. I mean, we pull them out in February, March, and eat them and sell them. So this is pretty cool. And this is our first crop of Daikon. So these are really early. These probably went in around the 1st of July. Let's see what it says. Should have a date. It does. I think it says 7/5. So 5th of July or so. And that's real early. We don't generally do them that. I I mean, we just have a couple beds that early because they aren't very tasty until it gets colder. And several big plantings of turnips, daikon, sweet potatoes, things like that. So a lot of those we'll harvest in the next several, months to 2 months, and we'll put them in our coolers. So we have a lot of cooler space. Ideal storage for all the brassica type things. So the turnips, daikon, those sorts of things are 35 degrees, or right at freezing, slightly above freezing. And if we do that, we keep high humidity in a tote and 35 degrees, then we can usually hold most of those things for months. I mean, they hold really well, and their quality does not drop. It helps if we harvest them when they're cold, so their sugars are already built up, because more sugar also inhibits the growth of a lot of the rot type, so molds and things like that would decay those things. So that's really nice, and I mention that because I think as we think about whether you're a home gardener or a market gardener or something in between, the goal is to have a year-round food supply, and some of that food supply is stuff that Sarah and I used to do a lot of preservation, and we have mostly given up on a lot of that because we can always grow fresh food. So we're okay with not having a lot of tomatoes in the wintertime because we're doing, we got fresh spinach and whatever. Now tomatoes are the one exception where we will preserve some tomatoes because we're such a tomato-oriented, food culture. But things like green beans and such, corn on the cob, we mostly think of those as just seasonal, wonderful things, and they come and go. Because we can do really good fresh greens, and then we can do these storage crops like sweet potatoes, winter squash, daikon, turnips, that can go really strong. Apples is another one. We'll usually buy, so we buy for our CSA, we buy maybe 100 bushels of apples, but we'll have apples until June out of that stock. And we'll, things like Fuji's that hold really well, Mutsu, there's a couple other, like, maybe not Mutsu, certainly Arkansas Black. Yeah, some of the Jonathans. So some of them, they hold varying well. Most of that's information is kind of lost to us, as far as we are out of the habit of root cellaring, we're out of the habit of doing food storage. But having a big cold space is really a big advantage if you want to have a year-round food supply because there's always something to eat. Of course, we can also do fermentation. It is, yeah.
With the energy here?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, not right now because, sun's not shining, but
Yeah.
all my cold storage is powered by the solar panels.
So does it go into batteries or?
No.
Just
No
convert it
backup,
during the
just
day?
ground, grid connected, so it's just offsetting my usage. Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty nice. So that's how I think about that production cycle. So there's some things that will grow right on through the winter. We kind of talked about what those are. We will move them into increasing levels of protection as the weather gets colder, right? So by the middle of January, when we're getting down to 10 degrees, 5 degrees, 0, negative temperatures, then everything that is really being harvested is under cover and usually under a couple of layers of cover underneath that cover. So it's like it's in a greenhouse or in a high tunnel, and then it's got a couple layers of row cover on it. The greenhouse is the only only growing space on the farm that we keep above freezing, and we let it get quite cold. It'll get down to like 36. So we are certainly not growing tomatoes and cucumbers in there, but it will stay just right above freezing, and that allows us to get better quality head lettuce, faster growth of some of the greens and things like that, and also gives us a place to keep some of our citrus trees and things like that we just have they're more hobbies than anything, but they're fun plants to have around. Everything else basically rides the temperature roller coaster because even high tunnels, unheated spaces like that, don't really stay very much above ambient temperature at night. So they're going to get down, if it's 10 degrees, they're going to be maybe 12 degrees. You're not really getting a big advantage there. What you are getting a big advantage is there's no wind blowing on those crops. There's no hail or ice or snow falling on those crops. And it's easy to use those covers inside. And the covers make a big difference. So that's an interesting thing. When you look at row covers and you go to buy row covers, they'll often say, provides, 2 degrees of temperature protection or 3 degrees. That's true unless they're in a totally still environment, in which case they provide a lot more. And that's because you've got this ground heat in a tunnel, in a high tunnel. In the daytime, we get a lot of heat being absorbed by the soil, so that even if it's only the soil's maybe 50 degrees, even 40 degrees, but then it drops down to 20 degrees at night. Well, you've got now 40 degrees and 20 degrees, and that row cover is creating a barrier between those two. And so what we see oftentimes is it has to get really cold before things freeze underneath the grow cover in a tunnel. Out in the open, it's different because the wind's moving that heat right out. But when that's still environment inside the tunnel, we can get a really really stable temperature under there. And so I can't think of any time I've ever seen the ground freeze inside the tunnel, underneath 2 layers of row cover. It just doesn't happen. There's enough heat in our soil, year round, that protects it. And that doesn't mean we're getting aggressive growth, but it does mean we can keep really healthy spinach and lettuce and things going in there. And then when we do get nice warm days, or even sunny days, that doesn't have to be particularly warm, then we do get a lot of growth, and that happens pretty quickly. Yeah.
Is there is there any difference between the 6 mil versus the cloth type of row cover in terms of which one does better, or they're both about the same?
Right. So I use the 6 mil plastic on the outside of all my greenhouses, and then I have used it on hoops over the plants. But most of my hoops and covers would be the fabric type covers, and most of them are the pretty light stuff. There's 1/2 ounce, 1 ounce, and 3 ounce. I think are the kind of the 3 main thicknesses that you see. And I have messed around with some of the 3 ounce stuff. The problem with it is it blocks all the light. I mean, not just block all the light. It blocks like 50% of the light, and that's a lot in the wintertime. You just don't get really any growth under those covers. Whereas your lightweight covers. And this kind of comes back to a bit of a lifestyle decision too. I like being able to not worry about those row covers being on. So if I'm gone for a couple days, we go backpacking or something in the wintertime, and I'm not available to pull the covers off, I can crack the sides on the tunnels a little bit, let them have a little natural ventilation, as long as it's not going to get really cold. Leave them covered, and they'll be fine. They won't overheat too badly. They will still have some sunlight coming in on them, still doing a little bit of growth.
So it should go to the 1 ounce, the one in the middle? Or?
Yeah, so the 1 ounce is nice. I like that. Or 2 layers of the lightweight stuff. And that kind of gives you, it's like dressing in layers. It gives you more options. But, and then, the nice thing about the heavier weight stuff is it's more durable. It's easier to use because you can't, the other stuff, it's so light, it's easy to tear. And once you start tearing, you lose a lot of your advantage pretty quickly.
So how do you deal with that, like aphids? Sometimes they'll
Yes.
live right through the winter.
Aphids are the absolute bane of our existence in the wintertime. Mostly late winter, early spring. How do we deal with aphids?
They don't like wind, I know that.
Right. No, they do really well in the tunnels. It's aphid heaven in there.
Yeah.
To some degree, we're picking fast enough that the aphid populations are kept somewhat lower by that mechanism. Of course, that's a problem because if there's enough aphids on the lettuce to actually be a problem, then it's really hard to get them off.
Right.
We do use safer soap to some degree. It's not great. It works a little bit. I mean, it probably maybe 50% effective, but that's something, And if we catch it really early, then we can sometimes knock down the populations with safer soap enough to keep it clear for another month or so. We do a lot of scouting in the wintertime to figure out what's going on. And then as soon as it gets warm enough for them to be effective, we buy ladybugs and spread them in the tunnels.
Yeah.
And that's very effective. But it really doesn't work until, in the greenhouse we can do that about the middle of February, and in the high tunnels it really doesn't work before the middle of March. Because otherwise it's just too cold most of the time, and they don't do well in that. They hibernate.
Yeah.
They're there, but they're not doing any good, So we use lacewings as well. But lacewings are even more of a warm weather type predator. Keeping your nitrogen levels within reason helps. Extra nitrogen tends to create crops that are magnets for aphids.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure why that is, but I know that is the case. Like extra fertilizer will bring in the aphids.
Yeah.
But then, of course, if you back off nitrogen too much, then you don't get very much spinach. So it's kind of always finding that gas and brake, and kind of figuring it out as we go along. Yeah. And then if it gets too bad, we'll just you rip them out. I mean, it's better at that point. Certainly late winter, early spring, it's better off to yank and replant than it is to struggle along with the sick crops. We've also found that usually, and I don't claim to understand what's going on here, but I do know that there will usually be a couple of individuals in a planting that attract most of the pests. And so if you grab those out, sometimes that's enough to kind of stop the pests from propagating too much.
Do you supplement your soil with nitrogen or phosphorus?
Yeah. So we use things like soft rock phosphate or bone meal for phosphorus. We'll use some chicken litter-based fertilizers, organic fertilizers for nitrogen. Blood meal is a nitrogen source that we use sometimes. We like using alfalfa pellets. That's our favorite. It's a slow release, so it doesn't necessarily work as well in the wintertime. In terms of soil life, which is a key to keeping the nitrogens going in the winter in the soil. Once you get below 50 degrees, you really don't have much action in the soil life. It's very, very slow, and so it's harder to use the slow release nitrogens at that point. That's when things like feather meal and blood meal are really handy.
So do you do soil testing, or do you mainly just kind of know how your plants are reacting or what they're using?
The answer is it depends. When we see problems, we'll send in the soil test. Mostly anymore, 15 years in, we feel like we can usually go, that's a healthy crop. We know what's going on there. We can look at celery and chard and beets and say, okay, we got a little bit of boron missing there. We can tune the soil a little bit there. We know that the cucurbits are going to want more calcium than almost anybody else. So we can do those kind of balancing, mostly by training and instinct now. Instinct's maybe the wrong word. Experience is probably a better way to say that. But yeah, we still do soil testing. The problem is with so many beds. I mean, we've got 400 crops, and then those 400 crops are spread across. I guess it's around 150 beds, and each of those beds has been treated a little bit differently over the years. So soil testing beyond a bed is almost not helpful because most of our big deficits are gone. It's really more like this little tweaking deficits where you go, well, there's something wrong there, but what is it? And so sometimes we'll send in a plant, and that'll help sort it out. They'll say, oh, well, this doesn't have, it's lacking in boron, lacking in iron, something like that. And we can amend that bed. But more often now, we're just watching it and kind of dealing with it that way.
We get a little pricing, or isn't it about
Right, yeah,
$12
$12 bucks minimum, and more like 25. And yeah, I mean, doing that on 150 beds is just not even remotely feasible. So.
I have a question about sweet potato harvesting, because
Yes.
after you harvest it, you have to
Yes.
put in a high humidity,
That's right.
and you have a large quantity. Oh, you put
Greenhouse.
it over there.
I put them in bins and I put them in the greenhouse. But you're absolutely right. You need them to stay at 80s and high humidity for several days. Preferably 10 days. If you can keep them at about 85 for 10 days, that's ideal. So what we do is we put them in the greenhouse, and we'll put a little heater, and we'll put a sheet of plastic over them so that at night they don't drop down too much.
And
that
for
the humidity's it's pretty humid in the greenhouse, and that when it's closed up, it stays pretty humid. And if you use plastic to cover them, then they stay pretty humid too.
You do only 4 or 5 days in bins and then put in a cold storage?
8
8
days.
days.
Never in the cold storage. It goes in the 55 degree storage. Yeah, which is cold, but
Yeah.
not that cold. Yeah. So, and really that's a compromise. The winter squash do a little better in that cooler range, and the sweet potatoes would be probably happier at 60. So 55 is our kind of.
After harvesting, do you wash your sweet potatoes?
No. We keep them dirty until we send them out.
Do you do that? You leave the soil on most of your crops?
It
But
varies.
you're not gonna
Some are better
eat.
than others. The sweet potatoes do well dirty because when you first bring them out, they're so soft. Their skin's so tender that any effort to clean them just skins them. So we find it's better to store those dirty. I don't know whether it would, maybe after we cured them, it would make sense to wash them and then store them, but it doesn't make sense labor-wise to do that, so we put them away dirty. And then things like carrots, we usually store those dirty unless they're wet and dirty. If they're wet, then we'll go ahead and wash them and dry them before we put them into storage. And then a lot of times it just depends on what kind of labor we've got, and what kind of day is it. If we're harvesting before a hard freeze and we're just trying to get a bunch of stuff out of the ground, then we're not going to mess with washing. We're just going to stick them in the cooler dirty, and we can pull them out on a next 60-degree day and run them through the root washer. And so it's more about labor flow. I have not found, other than that wetness issue, I haven't found soil to be a real vector for rot or spoilage.
I think it was yesterday I just read something about garlic, and someone had said they kind of did it both ways and felt that theirs lasted longer if they did not clean the soil.
Yeah. In fact, there are people who hose off garlic. They actually clean it with the water, and we've messed around with that a little bit because it's handy, but it does cause faster spoilage in our experience. So, yeah. We do cut the tops off garlic now in the field. For years, we thought we had to bring the whole plant in and dry it out, and that's how everybody was doing it, and that's still how most people do it. It's not necessary. Totally okay to cut it off out in the field and cure it, and we also cure it in black bulb crates with a dehumidifier and a fan rather than spread out on a table somewhere, which is what we used to do as well. So that's nice. One step instead of 6 or whatever it was before.